Dear Deputy Director Dinçbaş, dear Resident Representative Louisa, and dear guests, welcome to our panel on empowering women in climate policy making. And I'm really thrilled to host you all here at this event held in honour of International Women's Day last Friday. And I want to give particular thanks to our esteemed panellists, who are both extraordinarily busy, for their time this afternoon to address the challenges and the opportunities regarding women's involvement in climate action. Just over a year ago, the British government launched the International Women and Girls Strategy, which sets out how the UK puts gender equality at the heart of our foreign policy. And here in the in UK and Turkey, we have also developed our Turkey Network Gender Strategy to increase our commitment to women's advocacy across our work in Turkey. And I think this event will provide an excellent opportunity to discuss the issue from the perspective of the climate crisis, which has been more adversely impacting women as an existential threat. I'm really proud that the UK and Turkey have a long-standing and strong partnership in many areas, including climate action. And as the UK and Turkey, we've been implementing a number of climate projects in line with Turkey's own policy priorities. This year, in partnership with the British Institute, we designed and implemented a very successful project to help municipalities across Turkey promote rainwater harvesting practices, with a particular focus on Istanbul. With Turkey facing a growing risk of drought, this project supported local adaptation to water scarcity, and it's been a great example of building resilience over the longer term to adapt to the impact of climate change. As the implementing agency, the British Institute was in a really praiseworthy way committed to ensuring gender equality across all its activities. The project management team was mainly female, and there were an exactly equal number of male and female experts and participants, including in all the training sessions and the workshops, which was a great way to promote and empower female expertise. And in all the key project activities, women played a key role in delivering the project outcomes as speakers, panelists, and instructors. During a special panel on water management held in parallel to COP28 Water Day, held in Istanbul on the 8th of December, Professor Ayşen Erdinçli from Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality and Professor Hayriye Eşba from Istanbul Technical University gave very thought-provoking presentations. And in the closing event on the 12th of February, Şule Hanım from Kadıköy Municipality gave us a really compelling and interesting account of their experience in how to introduce rainwater harvesting, some of the problems they encountered, and the lessons that they learned. I'm sure Lut will be very happy to give you a readout to those of you who'd like to hear a little bit more about that project, which was really interesting. Other UK and Turkey projects in recent years have addressed agricultural wastewater management in relation to the mucilage problem in the Marmara Sea, youth engagement in combating climate change in Turkey, public awareness raising on climate action, strengthening the capacities of municipal staff for local climate action, and zero waste management at the local level. And in all these projects, we partnered with key climate stakeholders, including UNDP Turkey, the Nature Conservation Centre, the British Institute, and several municipalities. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them all for all their tireless activity and engagement. The UK's Trade Department has also been working in close cooperation with the Turkish public and private sectors on clean growth. And their work ranges widely across areas such as technology and smart cities, railways, urban transport, and energy-related issues, including offshore wind, hydrogen, and small modular reactors. What is more, a delegation from the UK will actually be in Turkey this week as part of the UK-Turkey Low Carbon Hydrogen Dialogue with the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. Turkey has also been included in the UK's Global Climate Finance Accelerator Programme. And since 2021 in Turkey, that programme has provided technical assistance to unlock financing for 3 cohorts of low-emission projects, with the 4th cycle now underway. As part of this, projects are given training on gender, equality, and social inclusion issues to enhance their positive impact in this area. Let me take a couple of moments to take this opportunity to highlight the UK's own climate ambition here. We're very committed to delivering ambitious climate action at the domestic and at the global level to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. We've already halved national greenhouse gas emissions since 1990, and we've set a legally binding net zero target by 2050. Now it's really important that we maintain momentum from COP28 to end deforestation, accelerate the global transition to clean energy, and leverage the full potential of private finance to drive down emissions and preserve our planet for future generations. So, thank you all for being with us today. I'm looking forward to a really inspiring discussion on the importance of gender equality and addressing both the impact of climate change and the problems of strengthening the role of women in policy making, and looking to you for some insights on how we really manage to do that effectively. So, turning to our panelists, we have Ms. Tuğba Dinçbaş, Deputy Director of the Turkish Climate Change Directorate. Welcome. And Louisa Vinton, Resident Representative of UNDP Turkiye. Also welcome. I'm really sorry that UK Chief Climate Negotiator Alison Campbell can't join us today. There's a very last-minute clash, but we do hope to welcome her on a future occasion to discuss these critical issues in more detail. So, let me today address the first question to Deputy Director Tuğba. Women are increasingly involved in climate and environment-related issues, both globally and here in Turkey. How do you see the role of women in climate policy making in Turkey? And have you seen a change over the last couple of years in the approach to climate change issues from a gender perspective?
Elçim, mukim temsilcimiz ve değerli konuklar. Distinguished DHM and distinguished UNDP representative, I would like to express my deep regards to all of you. Today we are here and I'm really very happy and honored to be with you in this event. Unfortunately, the Deputy Minister couldn't attend this event because of a clash of her program, but he conveys her best wishes to you all. I would like to start with the question. Actually, in the world, you see, as the United Nations also underlined, there is a tripartite crisis. And those 3 crises require a huge struggle. And of course, in this struggle, we should include the women. Particularly in terms of climate change, you know, when we look at the effects and the disasters, you see the most vulnerable group is the women and children. For instance, in cyclones in Bangladesh, 80% women were adversely affected, like Libya, like Bangladesh, like the other countries. It is the case. Particularly, the women are among the most vulnerable group, and therefore, they should take important roles in all the processes. In the climate policies, in terms of inclusion of women, we started with the Council of Climate, particularly what are the gender equality in those studies? Actually 50-50, we can say. And also, the immigration, the transfer, and also we have commission, and this commission is working on the vulnerable groups, and especially they are women in the majority. Also, when we look at the policies, our policies, you see in the NDC studies or the harmonization strategies, there are many documents, and we are, concluding stakeholder activities, and we are ensuring women participation, and we are very proud and happy. And also the climate negotiations, the negotiations, the women participation, and it is increased. This is always an item on the agenda. As the Turkey negotiation team, we are about 50 individuals altogether, and the majority of us, more than 50% of us, are women. And there's another subject to underline. When we look at the policies, again, from top to bottom and also bottom to top, we are trying to ensure the women participation. Particularly the First Lady, Emine Erdoğan, is our leader, in terms of zero waste initiative. This initiative is also underlying the importance of women in terms of climate change and policies. This is a very important indication because also when we look at the committee of the zero waste, the vast majority of the members are from women from the developing countries. Also, there's another factor to underline. In all those policy processes, not only the women, but also the young women should be included. We are trying to increase their inclusion. We have a study like the climate ambassadors. We assigned university students as the ambassadors of climate. They are supporting us today, but tomorrow those young ladies will be the policymakers. So we are trying to strengthen them. And also they identified their own team, and also they are coming with us to the COP conferences, and 3 out of 5 are women. So it's very important. So I can underline from top to bottom, we pay attention to the inclusion of women into all those processes. It's very important for us because climate change is a global phenomenon, and the solution is also global. So when we look at the population of the world, it's almost more than half of women. Half of the population is women. So we should take into consideration the perspective of women, because we have the passion as women, and we have to adapt ourselves accordingly, because we need this, and it would be really beneficial to reach to our ultimate goals. So therefore, in all our processes, it doesn't matter policy making or other activities and everything, we are trying to include women into all of those activities. This is our objective. That's all for now.
Thank you very much, Tuğba. That's fascinating, which gives me a very good lead-in to turn to Louisa and say, as we've heard, climate change is not gender neutral. But in terms of developing these climate change policies with gender considerations mainstreamed right through them, how do we actually assess the specific impacts of climate change on women and girls? And how does that intersect with other inequalities?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today, especially since UNDP has a very long-standing close partnership with the UK in Turkiye on climate action, and this is not the first event where we've been participants in this lovely venue and heard the eloquence of our British colleagues, which always makes, I say as an American, us a little bit green with envy at the speaking skills that we see in British diplomacy, but we also have a very special relationship with the Ministry of Environment, Urbanisation, and Climate Change, having worked with them on developing a number of the key strategies for mitigation and adaptation. So very happy to be here today with very close partners. And just to say at the outset that UNDP treats as priorities both climate and gender and the intersection of climate and gender. So very happy to have an opportunity to speak on these issues today. And just to say, by way of introduction, I think, one of our key messages on both of these issues is that we have really no time to waste. We were talking in the warm-up period here about, the difficulty of trying to have adaptation policies is that we have kind of lost track of what we're trying to adapt to, because the impact of climate change has moved so fast, much faster, I think, than the science had anticipated, and that we're seeing this pace and ferocity of climate-driven disasters coming much, much more powerfully than we or science had led us to anticipate, and that we're already, I think the temperature for February was 1.77 degrees above the baseline. So we are, I think, already in this 1.5 degree, post 1.5 degree world. And just to say that, whatever we can do to make climate policy more effective and to mobilize more voices for some kind of change on both sides of the equation, mitigation and adaptation, the better off we'll be. And a key part of that is ensuring that 50% of the world's population is heard and involved in the solution. So on this issue of climate and gender neutrality, and as Tuğba has said already, women emerge from the impact of climate change as more vulnerable. So on this issue, I always find the word vulnerable to be a tricky one for women, because we know that we're strong people. So to be described routinely as vulnerable makes me a little bit angry. And that's why I say, I don't think it's about climate, it's about inequality. The reason women are more vulnerable to the impact of climate change is not because we're more vulnerable as people, or that there's anything biologically that makes us more exposed, with one exception I'll get to. It's that we live in a society where women face prejudice, inequality as a routine everywhere in the world. Let's say we don't have a single example of a gender equal society because of differentials in power, access to power, lack of agency, lack of voice. With maybe one exception, we do see that excessive heat tends to lead to greater health complications for women in their reproductive roles. So we see this rise in temperatures above the 40, above the 50 degree, leading statistically to an increase in things like stillbirth. So there is some sort of health indication that women need to have better protections from climate change. But otherwise, I think we see that wherever there's an inequality, whether it's men and women or people with disabilities, elderly people, LGBT people, people who tend to be invisible in societies in general, wherever there is an inequality, there is a higher risk of impact from climate change driven factors, disasters, droughts, floods, forest fires, the litany of disasters that we're seeing. I always think that the gender impact of climate change is conveyed better through examples than through language that people often can dismiss as ideological. And I'm remembering now back to 20 years ago when I started in UNDP, and one of my first trips was to the South Caucasus, and somebody was telling me about gender inequality and water governance. And at the point I was a feminist, I would have called myself a feminist, but I just looked at them and I said, what do you mean? How can water governance have a gender impact? So you all know better than I do that water is very gender-rich topic, and women's access to water, women's role in bringing water is a key one. But I think in some cases, the language used to communicate the gender impact of climate change can be off-putting because it makes people bristle. So just to go through some of the examples that, I go to, because I think it makes for a more convincing, a more impactful discussion of the gender impact of climate change, is that in many, many, many societies, food, water, and fuel are considered women's work. Women take care of the food, the water, the fuel, and women do much of the world's agricultural labor and produce the food. But when the food comes under pressure, or the agricultural produce comes out under pressure, whether it's from a drought or flood, then it's the women who have to work more, and then it's the girls who are pulled out of school to do the work in the fields. Women do a lot of the agricultural work, but they own only a tiny minority of the land involved. So When it comes to questions of finance or credit, or when it comes to questions of aid, only a tiny fraction of that aid or that credit goes to the women who are doing most of the agricultural work. And I think the latest number that floats around is that only 10% of aid for agriculture, forestry, and fishing goes to women. So you have women out in the fields, you have girls pulled out of school to do the work when there's a drought, but then you have women not able to access the finance or the aid that might make their crops more resilient. So in many, many societies, women collect water and firewood. And whenever there's a drought, the women and the girls have to walk farther and often under very dangerous conditions to get that wood and water, and often at the risk of their education. So, and then all of these things come from research and evidence. When food is scarce, it's the women who stop eating their portion. So, and then sort of most existentially, maybe statistically, women are less likely to survive disasters, not because they aren't capable of surviving disasters, but because of the roles that they play. And again, we come to the high degree of inequality, that women tend to be the family caregivers. We see this in Turkey, we see this in almost every society. So when there's a disaster, and we've seen this, I think, very clearly across the earthquake affected region, that women who were doing the care services before, taking care of children, taking care of the elderly, taking care of persons with disability, once you lose your house and you have to live in a container city, then the burdens of care are multiplied, and it's the women who fall ill from exhaustion or succumb to some kind of mental illness as well. And we do see that levels of sexual and domestic violence rise as a rule in the wake of disasters. As Tuğba said, there's a lot of evidence from a lot of the world's biggest cataclysms that, for example, in the Asian tsunami in 2004, 70% of the victims were women. Similar proportions in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, because women tend to be home and taking care of the children and the elderly when disaster strikes. And even something as simple as access to a radio. In many cultures, the men are the ones who listen to the radio, who hear the disaster alert. It's the women who would have to hear from some trusted family member that there's heavy weather warning. And even something as simple as swimming lessons. It's often women who are not taught how to swim. If we're in a world of flash flooding, swimming is a vital survival skill. So again, my point would be, it's not that women can't swim, it's that women aren't taught to swim. And so the inequality is the cause of the vulnerability, not the biology. The converse is true, I think, that as Tuğba has said, including women, will help find better solutions for climate change. And there was a nice quotation in The Economist magazine that you've probably seen, that climate change is a threat multiplier, but women can be solution multipliers. So that women shouldn't be seen as only or primarily as the potential victims of climate change, but agents of change in bringing the solutions. And I think in this situation, we see the very factors, some of the factors that hold women back, for example, that they are the primary food producers, are somehow in many societies closer to the soil, closer to nature, can make them better advocates for protecting the planet. And this is not just my prejudice, but is supported by some vast considerable body of research and evidence, that policies developed with the inclusion of women tend to be more radical in the measures that are proposed for mitigation and for adaptation. And often it's the women who are the holders of traditional knowledge. In one of my previous assignments in North Macedonia, it was the women who held on to the indigenous species, the native seeds that are somehow more resilient to climate change, whereas whereas mainstream agriculture had gone to the industrial crops that tend to be more vulnerable in conditions of climate change. And lots of times it's women who know where to find the water and can be relied upon to find the well in times of drought. So including women in the solution gives us 100% of the ingenuity and creativity that we can rely on. But I think I would go back in concluding that it's really the inequality that is the problem. And so if we attack those inequalities across the board, the deficits of women in leadership, the deficits of women in employment, the deficits of women in livelihoods, the deficits of women's voice and agency, we will have ways to ensure that women are less vulnerable, but also ways to ensure that the solutions that we're looking at are better and certainly take into account the needs and desires of 100% of the population rather than just half.
Thank you very much, Louisa. So picking up on that point about women's vulnerability, perhaps because of inequalities, can I turn to you, Tuğba Hanım? What policies are in place to address women's vulnerability in Turkey, as well as strengthening their ability to contribute to the solutions towards combating climate change?
Evet. Aslında Louisa Hanım'ın söylediği gibi, as Louisa stated, women actually are the vulnerable group because of the inequalities. I agree with her. Actually, they increase the resilience. Actually, they have a critical importance in society in terms of energy, food, etc. And also the success of women is very important in terms of the developing countries. First of all, in our documents like health, training, education, they're all involved, but also women and women issues are included, sorry. Also, we have a climate change adaptation strategy and action plan. The latest version is about to be published next week. So it is very important in the climate change and struggle with this climate change. While we were preparing our strategy and action plan, we allocate a part like social strategies and activities and actions and everything. And we are trying to include women in all parts of this document. Maybe I can give a couple of examples. First of all, there was a data problem. Based on data, based on information, you know, is very important. Therefore, we should have correct data, and Turkey needed the infrastructure, just like the education and training opportunities given to women or women farmers and etc. We will have an infrastructure study to solve this problem. And on the other hand, in terms of social factors, we would like to have a more fair adaptability for women. The adaptability policies should be fair for women actually. So we include actions accordingly into the document. And also women can be affected differently from the climate change, and this is important to be realized. Also, we have developed different actions in relation to it, and they are in line with sustainability. So adaptation, you know, adaptation is very important in climate change. So women is a vulnerable group. Therefore, we emphasize their situation in this document. Particularly, climate change is not limited with adaptability, of course. The mitigation strategy and action plan for 2024-2030. So there will be an action plan of Turkey for those years, which is in line with our adaptation strategy. So we consider the actions in a different perspective in the second document, like industry, agriculture, land use. Those are important. The women agricultures will be supported by financial aids, or they will be supported by special trainings and etc. Also, apart from all, climate finance and women's access to climate finance is important in terms of R&D, in terms of developing technology. You know, the women researchers should be supported. even financially. And also there has to be a fair transmission. There will be a strategy also for it. New employment opportunities will be created for women. So how to include women, how they become more efficient and effective, all those factors are considered. When I say technology, I also would like to underline something else. You know, the IPCC, the panel, the seventh cycle started. The first meeting was in Istanbul in January, you would recall, and the third working group in relation to mitigation. The deputy head of that group is a Turkish woman scientist. So this is very important. So we are very thankful for her support and studies. It was a very challenging process, but this subject is also being discussed in IPCC. You know, unfortunately, limited number of women researchers are working in IPCC, but it doesn't mean that we don't have enough researchers. Definitely we have, but they should be supported and they should be on the forefront all the time. Another aspect, as you all know, climate change, adaptation and coordination board Turkey has. And actually, this is the highest board, this responsible for policies and strategies for Turkey. So this coordination board, the Family and Social Sciences Ministry was not involved in the past. And in the last 2 years, we worked on it very hard. And now the Ministry of Family and Social Sciences are also included in this board because it is very important. The policies, women policies, and their support in the development of women policies are important. So right now, the Turkish Ministry of Family and Social Sciences are in the board. Also, as I said a couple of minutes ago, the green transformation, new employment opportunities, the raising of engineers, for instance, women engineers, and their role is critical. Right now, we are working with the Ministry of Labor. So just like the Ministry of Family, they are also included in the coordination board. In the world, when we look at the picture, the climate change was an environmental issue, then turns into an economic one, and then continues like mitigation of emissions, etc. But right now, today, we know that it has also social dimensions. And in terms of adaptability and adaptation, the social inclusion should also be underlined because we need to transform ourselves. It is social and it is economic transformation. So women is critical in this transformation. So as I underlined before, women is inevitable for the success.
Thank you. And picking up Louisa immediately on that point, we know gender equality is a core part of UNDP work globally, and UNDP is at the forefront of UN work in this area, both globally and in Turkey. What are you doing overall on gender equality, and what steps have you taken in Turkey on this agenda?
Thank you so much. Yes, you may have to cut me off at a certain point because, yeah, this will get me really going. This is a very high priority for UNDP globally and here in Turkey, and we really are doing a lot, but I think the challenges are also very, very daunting in this area. Just to say that, you know, in the UN more broadly and UNDP as part of the UN system, we approach gender equality directly head on through efforts oriented, for example, at reducing the prevalence of violence against women. But then also we take, I don't like jargony words, but we take this mainstreaming approach of everything we do, we think about gender as part of it, about men, women, and everything in between. And this is the approach of the Sustainable Development Goals. I wear my colors proudly of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, that there is one, number 5, devoted entirely and explicitly to gender equality, which calls for, among other things, the complete abolition of all violence against all women and girls everywhere by 2030. So you can see we have a lot to do in a very short period, but also includes indicators on progress for women and women's rights and equal rights across all of the other 16 global goals. So unfortunately, we're not doing so well in our pursuit of the SDGs. I think we're on track only for 19% of the indicators at this point. So also, as with climate change, more work is needed. In Turkey, I think there are some pretty big challenges that we see if we look at a government that has one and only one woman minister, that in the areas of violence against women, political and social leadership, and in the economy, that there is a long distance to go towards equality. In UNDP, every year we produce something called a Global Human Development Report, which covers a topical issue of concern on development, but also includes regular index, human development index, ranking all the world's societies in terms of their human development level. The newest report will come out day after tomorrow, so I can cheat a little bit and tell you that Turkey scores very, very high in the Human Development Index, 45, number 45 out of 193 countries. So don't tell anyone I told you in advance. But we also do a gender-weighted Human Development Index. And if you take these basic indicators of gender equality, then Turkey's rank falls considerably. So it does have an impact on status in the world and progress. Where we focus in UNDP, among other issues, is on these dual issues, related issues of work and care. And if I cite a few numbers, you'll know why we do that. So as I think most of you are aware, there's a huge gap in labor force participation between men and women in Turkey. So the rate for men is just under 71%, and for women is just under 35%. So basically 50% of the proportions. And then more than half of young women aged 18 to 29, so young women, let's say 51.2%, are not in employment, education, or training. So are in this NEET category that is a concern for economists and sociologists everywhere, because it reflects a group that's likely to remain outside the workforce for life, and therefore losing the earnings potential and also the sense of independence, I think, and special dignity that comes with earning a living. So it's 51% of young women and only 17.6% of young men. 17.6% of young men are in this NEET category. So I think two statistics that are very telling. And why is that? So also, I think you're all aware, the explanation is the burden of unpaid care work that is done in the home. So housework, but also caring for children, elderly people, persons with disabilities. On average, women in Turkey perform 5 hours per day of this unpaid care work and housework. So it's a big burden. And some studies have even found, very severe deficit of leisure time for women, that there is no space there for relaxation or recreation. So what are we doing to help our partners in government and society address these issues? We've been working for a long time on the idea of what's called a care economy. So this idea that if quality services, care services can be provided either commercially or through state systems at a sufficient level. For example, if the deficit in preschool and kindergartens care were fulfilled, then many more women could enter the workforce, and the Turkish economy would benefit from a huge burst of labor. But also those who are receiving care would be able to receive care at a level that's more, that what's assumed to be sort of a woman's nature to give care is not necessarily what persons with disabilities need. So a lot of work has been done on this, and Turkish feminist economists are incidentally leading the charge on this. And one of them did research supported by UN Women and UNDP a couple of years ago that showed if you invested the same amount of money in physical infrastructure and in what was called care infrastructure, so filling this gap in the demand for preschool and kindergarten care, that you would create 3 times as many jobs in the care economy, most of them for women, but not all. Whereas in this hard infrastructure, the employment was almost entirely male, and it was of a much less higher quality than the employment in the care economy. So there's a lot of work done on building models. What we want to do in UNDP is do what we can to help translate this into a real vision, and it's something we've been working on also in the response to the earthquakes. So I'll get to that, but we're also working in this area of neat women. So to say, okay, how can you deal with this issue where you have so many young women who are somehow out of the mainstream of employment, education, training, how to bring them in, how to make the issue more visible. We have a great partner in this with the Sabancı Foundation. And in the past couple of years, we've been developing very intensive courses for women, for young women in high demand, non-conventional employment areas. So for example, we have in Izmir now automotive training for young women, where the municipality of Izmir is guaranteeing some of the employment at the end of the day in its motor pool. Barista is almost an instant ticket to employment. So we have women training to be baristas all over the place, many, many different areas. So that's something getting going. We're also working together with the European Union and the Ministry of Industry and Technology on a project to increase the representation of women in manufacturing professions, especially engineering, technology occupations where they're highly underrepresented. So there's a lot of work going on in trying to fill these gaps, but I think we always need to see the other side of the equation too, which is how to relieve women from this excessive burden of care. It can be done through tackling stereotypes as well. Our sister agency, UNFPA, works a lot on building different models of male behavior so that men can undertake some of the care responsibilities at home. But then just to explain a little bit about, if I may, if I have time, how we've pursued these principles in the earthquake response. So on the one hand, we do see, as I said earlier, huge burden on the caregivers, moving from people who've lost their homes and lost established systems, particularly for children and adults with disabilities. You know, often there was a system that functioned because you had the privacy of your home, you had all sorts of solutions, you lose it. So an increased need for professional care for elderly people, people with disability, and children. So we've helped to establish a lot of accessible community centers and care centers for elderly and disabled people across the earthquake affected area to try to deal with one part of the equation. But on the other hand, on the other part, we did see a huge need for support to women who were in business and were on the edge of staying out of business in the recovery. So particularly small businesses, small retail sector, which suffered much bigger damage than big industry in the earthquake response. You know, often the shops and small manufacturing units that would be in the first floor of the residential towers that collapsed. So we took almost all the funding that we had from Sweden, one of our most generous donors, and put it in a program of what we called earthquake recovery grants for small business. At the end of the day, we spent $10 million, we invested, let's say, $10 million in a program across all 11 provinces that was skewed not exclusively for women, but the criteria favored women-headed businesses, businesses employing, so women-rich businesses. In the end, we awarded 4,616 grants. We're very proud of this, and I will bore you to death with the stories from this program. But what did we find? We found that this was not just a financial investment in businesses. So you had to be a registered business that had suffered damage or destruction in the earthquake. We found that the funding was really not the sole positive factor, and perhaps not the most important positive factor. What was important was we caught women at a point where they were leaning towards defaulting to their care responsibilities. So many of them told us, look, I lost everything. I lost my shop. I lost my inventory. Many of my customers moved, injured, deceased. And I was thinking I would just devote my time to taking care of my father who was injured. But they got our email, they applied, they got the grant, and they're back in business. And it's a totally different outlook financially, but more importantly, I think mentally. So it's, again, an issue of inequality that women face this choice, but I think we feel that it's not a program we designed. We just got into it because people started asking us, but one that shows, I think, the potential of women and potential of women to be driving the economic recovery across the earthquake zone, particularly at the small business level, but also the risk if there is not support to deal somehow with this excessive burden of care. So we see lots of potential, and obviously I'm not a person who likes the vulnerable label. I really prefer the strong, resilient, capable label. And I think whether a woman falls into one category or the other depends on the support of society, government, and also what we do as international organizations. So,
Louisa, for those hard-hitting comments. So a final question from me to both of our panelists before we go to questions from the audience. First, Tuğba Hanım, if you had to give us just a limited number of key messages on what we do from here on gender equality in relation to in relation to climate action, what would they be? And maybe we'll go for your top three each and see whether it's the same or different.
Teşekkürler. Kadının güçlenmesi sadece strengthening of women, empowerment of women is not just reducing the vulnerability of women. It is not limited with the climate change activities. This is important for a fair life for all of us, for a fair and equal future for all of us. Climate change is a complex factor. There are many variables in it. And in the solution to that important problem, women should be included. And the approach of women is our strength. So in all those processes, women should be included. The world population, half of the population is women. So how can you ignore the half of the world's population? Otherwise, you cannot be talking about a policy or a program applicable. So within the framework of the UNFCCC, there are different actions and programs and everything. I agree with Louisa. This finance is not the unique problem, but we should divert financial resources to women, particularly in the developing countries, so that we can support their existence. The main problem here is that, you know, the green transformation brings novelties to the employment. So this process should be planned with women, and all those activities should include women. So in terms of gender equality, we can reach our ultimate goal. Climate change process is an opportunity for us. They are affected adversely, but to reach our targets, we can use the strength of women.
Thank you very much. And Louisa, over to you.
Any disagreement here? I think what I would emphasize is again going back to my starting point, that really it's so important to address inequality more broadly, so across the board, not simply in as we see it reflected in the impact of climate change. Second is, you know, why would any rational person decide to draw on only 50% of humanity's brain power and creativity and ingenuity when we're facing such an emergency? And the third point would just be the benefits go to everybody. You know, the benefits are not just for women, the benefits are for humankind, let's say, and the planet. So really just to stop there, that I think equality at the forefront, participation and heeding the voices of everyone. And I think it's not just women who are often left out of equations. And then just to have the confidence that really this is a benefit for everybody. When we include everyone in the solution, everyone will benefit from the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both our panelists. That was fantastic and very thought-provoking. As I open up to questions from the audience, there are a couple of people I would like to turn to first, if they have a question. Afire Sever, the Director General for Water Management under the Agriculture and Forestry Ministry, to tell us about the First Lady's water efficiency campaign.
Katılım sağlayamadı. Onun yerine ben söz almak istedim.
I'm very sorry. My name is Huri Üncecik Ceylan. I am from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. Unfortunately, the Director General could not attend the event, and I would like to convey her best wishes to all of you. Actually, I would like to talk about water efficiency campaign. As you know, First Lady Emine Erdoğan is dealing with the zero waste, and actually this campaign is very important, and she is a role model for Turkish women. And after this campaign, we can say the water, which is one of the most important resources of us, this should be preserved. And of course, women touch is also very important in the preservation of water. And now it is turned into a social phenomenon. So First Lady Emine Erdoğan initiated a water efficiency campaign in 2023. And within the framework of this campaign, of course, we are not limited our works with the sectors using water. We have developed strategies and policies for the whole country. We are trying to consider the adaptation in terms of climate change, and because they have impact on water efficiency. So we have guidelines. We have 151 guidelines for 162 industrial sectors. So the objective is to reduce water use by those industrial sectors 60%. So this is an important target. In agriculture in Turkey, water use is 77%. So as to be more sustainable, water efficiency in agriculture should be underlined. And also in terms of individual water use, this is also an important aspect. We have objectives. We would like to reduce the amount of water used by individuals in our country. Individual use of water should be also reduced. We touch all those subjects within the framework of the campaign. And in the forthcoming days, there will be the first anniversary of this campaign. And actually, we are in the Mediterranean basin, and Turkey is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. Our actions would not only bring benefits for our countries, but also to the other relevant neighboring countries. We would like to share our principles and policies and everything with other countries. So thank you very much for listening to me. I don't want to take much of your time. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you very much for your experience and comments. So water is very important and very much affected by climate change, and water efficiency campaign. I would like to invite you all as being water ambassadors.
Thank you very much. And before you lose the microphone, can I just ask you one follow-up question on the water campaign? So a year into the campaign, can you perhaps tell us one area that you have discovered is an easy win on water efficiency, and one area that is proving really difficult, and why?
Şöyle söyleyebilirim. Sahiplenişlik anlamında en kolay
the easiest factor is actually the girls. the young women and girls are very aware of the significance of water campaign, and we received the feedback, easiest feedback from this group. So it's very important, and they do it not only for themselves or and they do it for their families and also friends. So the challenging part in terms of policy, we are really supported, but turn the policy into action is a bit challenging in terms of the local authorities. You know, convincing the local authorities is difficult, and when it is widespread to all the 81 provinces, we will be more successful. We would like to make people actually accept it, and then we can continue in a stronger way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me now open up the floor for questions from others in the audience who would like to ask a question to our panelists. Please, lady in the front row. Please give your name and
sure, I think they would
affiliation
speak the Turkish and English here both, but just for the sake of maybe both like further clarity, I can just express myself in English. So I'm Burcu Aydın. I'm the Director of Structural Economic Policies at TEPAP, Turkish Economic Policy Institution. And thanks for your invitation and for the great speeches. I think climate and gender equity is just a burning issue, a very deep burning issue. From the economic perspective, I'm an economist by myself. So most of the research done on gender equity shows, based on the recent trends of reforms, the gender equity gap is not going to close within the next 300 years. And without the degrowth pattern, so it's impossible to reach the Paris climate actions ever, so without degrowth. So both actions seem very unlikely, both gender equity and the action towards, climate change seems very, very unlikely without a very vivid change in terms of how the global policies are done in terms of the world. So I was just wondering, because you just mentioned the Human Development Index, Turkey's improvement in terms of the Human Development Index. So I just wonder how come Turkey has improved its scale by I guess by 8 percentage points, right? Because the previous one was 48 in terms of the ranking, and I recall you said 40. So I was just curious how Turkey improved its ranking within a year, if you don't mind. Thank you, by the way, for your time.
Well, I just wanted to agree with you on that. I think it's the Human Development Report, this is just a teaser, so you'll all read it from cover to cover. It really focuses on, I think one of the consequences of what you point out, that many people you say there is no hope, and then kind of retreat into a position of paralysis, or I don't know, I have talked in the past about climate grief, that you are mourning the planet that somehow we see we've lost. So indeed, it's important to find a way out of this, I think, sense of immobility also on goals like gender. So, but okay, on the Human Development Index. So the Human Development Index was thought of in the early 1990s as a way to get away from GDP as a simple indicator of the well-being of society. So GDP was somehow the wealth of societies, and at the time UNDP said, okay, but how can we come up with a simple index that will capture something more? And so UNDP measures includes 3 basic measures. One is GDP per head. One is, and then there's another set around well-being, that's longevity, and longevity is one. I think there are 2 indicators that go into this sort of well-being, and then education has 2 also, the mean years of education and educational attainment. And so where Turkey has really gained is on the GDP one. So, and the measures for the 2023, 2024 report go back to 2022 for all countries involved. So it doesn't take into account, for example, any impact from the earthquakes, Turkey had 1 year of decline, which was the pandemic year, as did most countries. So this is also why UNDP adds many different customizations to this Human Development Index, because it works well up to a point. But then if you want to capture things like gender inequalities, there's a Human Development Index customized for gender equality. There's also one on environmental footprint, where actually Turkey performs very, very well because of its limited contribution to carbon emissions at this point. I'm looking at what I'll know better. So that's a bit of why, Turkey continues to rise in the indicator. It's also that longevity has increased, I think, by 10 years since the index was so health indicators have improved. But it's really it's not a very precise index of everything that goes on in a country. It's more to give people a flavor of the direction and then to situate it relative to other countries. So I haven't studied where we are from last year, but again, it goes back to 2022, long discussion. But I think where I would point is, again, the customization of it to the different challenges that have arisen since it was invented. So gender equality, also inequalities taken more broadly, and also that brings Turkey down quite substantially. And then the environmental footprint, which sort of puts Turkey in a superior position to many, but I think is an indication of the country's potential to contribute. We always have discussions with the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change on the level of ambition of the climate commitments. And I think this is the message that would come from our Secretary General. Again, going back to your original thoughts that we will never achieve anything at the current pace, is that there needs to be, going into the next COP, it's kind of the last, all of these have been the last opportunity, but there really needs to be pressure on leaders, societies, and say local governments also can play a big role. Private sector can play a big role, particularly in Turkey, to put big pressure to go more ambitious nationally, but then also globally, so that we will see a shorter time frame to some kind of rescue from climate change that you mentioned.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question? If nobody's going to come forward, I might, yes, please, gentlemen in the third row.
Does it work? Okay. Kylian Vivien from the French Embassy. I have a very, concrete question. I've been traveling a bit around the country, seeing some wonderful, actually natural places, some rural areas, but witnessing at the same time when stepping on the side of the road that was basically full of plastic. And I think I'm not the only one who saw that. I saw that in many other countries as well. But I was wondering what's left to be done in terms of individual education to environmental issues. It goes beyond the mere climate aspect, but pollution, water use as well. Is there enough being done for the grassroots education of pretty much everybody in the country? Are there ideas on how to spread that knowledge? And what could be the role of women in spreading that knowledge?
Let me turn to Tuğba first to answer that one.
Evet. Actually, the capacity development and its impact in relation to environment, to preserve plastics, wastes, preservation of seas, and etc., it is important. There is news of implementation. So the capacity building is being made, but we should look at how efficient they are, because hereby we are talking about the action plan and strategy of climate change, and also there are capacity building activities in it. The Ministry of Education and the Higher Education Board, we are working in cooperation. But you know, as it is the case in the world, we are suffering it in Turkey as well. Education, environmental education is not enough. Because even though you deliver an education or a training, it doesn't mean that it is perceived and being implemented by the receiver. So in the young population, we should focus on children. So as it has been discussed a couple of minutes ago, we should do it. We should start with children so they can transform their own families. Also, the ethical aspect should also be considered, but everybody does not have the same ethical values, so we need to implement different instruments. For instance, I have worked with industrialists for a long period of time. While we are explaining environment to an industrialist, we should focus on how much saving they have from the raw materials, how much they can achieve, I don't know, some export profit, etc., etc. We should focus on from their own perspective. So you should train and educate the groups differently according to their expectations. But it doesn't matter which method you use. You can use sanctions, you can use educations, you can use penalties, or you can start with children, or you can follow control measures and etc. It doesn't matter what tool you are using it. The system should be very well developed and should be very well followed. This is what we are trying to do, but I agree it's very challenging. In terms of water efficiency, also we have worked in water sector. 70% of water is being used in agriculture in Turkey, so this water should be used more efficiently. Different technologies can be adapted or widespread. We need finance, of course, but first of all, we should start with the education and training of the agriculture, which is the most difficult one. The structural transformation should start with the mental transformation. Technology and finance can be done easier in comparison to the mental transformation.
Thank you very much. Did you have anything to add there, Louisa?
I think it's a great question, and I think that what you're seeing is a very real challenge. And you know, UNDP has a lot of environmental programs that are, one coming up is going to be on plastic waste in marine areas. And I think anybody who's visited the lovely Turkish coast, you've experienced a day where you go and there's beautiful sandy beach and you might see a sea turtle even, and then there's a storm and you wake up the next morning and the beach is actually some kind of horror movie of plastic bottles of various shapes and sizes, really. So that I think the issues are real, and not just Turkey specific, because Turkey has the good fortune to be surrounded by so many seas, all of which bring different waste materials also in addition to what can be produced here. So the challenge is real. I would agree completely with what you were saying, Tuğba, and I would in particular focus on children, turn them into little terrorists of environmental protection, because I think there's nothing like the enthusiasm of a child to have a system that's going to protect the planet. But I think also we need to keep in mind the financial incentives and to calibrate those well. One area where we're working, where is on working with municipalities on these zero waste programs, but also making use of what is very clearly a very powerful economic incentive. There are thousands of waste collectors, formal and informal, who brave really inhuman conditions, often using their children to collect waste. It is a livelihood, you know. It is something. There wouldn't be thousands of people doing it if it weren't an income, but it's undeniably something that can be civilized and made more safe. And so this is one of our efforts working forward, is especially in areas where with high concentrations of Syrian refugees who tend to do this as an income generating source, to make it a civilized occupation and to work together with municipalities so there's more efficient use of what's collected, but then from the side of the waste collectors to make sure that it's something that is not a degrading occupation. So, but I think ensuring that there's a lot of, I think, advocacy, and I think the First Lady is advocate #1 for zero waste. You know, she managed to convince the UN General Assembly to make the 30th of March International Zero Waste Day. There's a big advisory board, so she's done a huge amount to bring attention to the issue. But I think then what's needed is to translate that enthusiasm, that will to deal with waste into local initiatives that where there is an incentive for people to do whatever needs to be done, and to ensure that, I think, you know, we need also a mentality change, so not to make the plastic in the first place. I think is, you know, this circular economy approach where we need to completely change and wear one coat and take bags to the supermarket to get our produce instead of always having things wrapped in plastic. So I think there's a lot that can be done that isn't being done and could be done with the right combination of policies and financial incentives. Thanks.
Thank you, Louisa. Yes, lady there.
I just want to pick up where Louisa stopped, because we are a foundation. I'm Aylin Gezgüç. We established a foundation to help the transition to circular economy, and we were the beneficiaries for 2 projects from UNDP Global Environment Fund Small Grants Program, which we appreciated so much. So thank you for having that facility. I hope it continues many more years. In fact, in Kaş and Gökçeada, we worked with 101 small cafes and small businesses, and were able to prevent 79,000 units of one-time use of plastics. We had a small team, but when I think about all these coffee shops that give out, you know, my son always says, "Mom, you are, you know, I realize your passion in trying to achieve something, but do you realize how many millions are out there?" One thing we saw that was, if the supply is so much, collecting it or preventing it becomes a bigger task. So that's probably one of the basic issues, and we actually encourage these businesses to have water supplies so that people could bring in their bottles and fill it. And the other one was, we actually encouraged them through the funds you provided. We gave them funds so that they could buy compostable units instead of one-time use. And there we saw that these types of suppliers are having issues of demand. They're not able to scale their production because they're not well known. So we would love to have a second phase of this project where we could help support these suppliers to be more visible rather than the one-time plastic, producers. So some thoughts on circular economy initiatives maybe, and with the big suppliers like I don't want to name their names, but there are huge ones that we need to look at. In fact, it's not just about the children and the young people saying, I don't want it, but it's engraved in ourselves, and we even put our names on them, and we just throw them away in half an hour as if it belongs to us. So maybe more circular economy initiatives, financial incentives need to be thought about. I don't know if you are working with UNEP about that, but they seem to be working hard on preventing plastic economy or introducing a new plastic economy. So maybe you have some thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Which of our panelists would like to comment on that? Louisa, did you want to go first? There's a specific UNDP reference.
Yes. No, thank you. I agree with everything you say, and definitely would want to try to expand the work. You know, lots of these programs, the SGF small grants will continue, and I think the focus has been for the past 2 years on plastics, and I think a lot of good initiatives have managed to show the way, and those need to be expanded. So I think they're, you know, not just from international community, but also from big industry, we could count on, you know, working together to lobby for more changes, because I agree, it's a change in mindset, and the more we can eliminate the production of plastic altogether would be great. So thank you. Just to enthusiastically support your ideas.
Bu biraz önce bahsettiğim yeşil in terms of the green transformation, you know, there are different factors. Circular economy is one of them. And actually, we are also working on circular economy plans, but of course, in terms of capacity building or in terms of awareness, we know that the steps are very important, but of course, it has to be a system. You should use the wastes within the system, and then at the end there would be no waste. So we are harmonizing our systems with the European Union activities in terms of automotive sector, for instance, in terms of circular economy, in line with circular economy. I mean, some of the parts should be manufactured, for instance, from recyclable materials. So this is a system very important, and it should be sound because it is important for increasing Turkey's competitive power. So also in the metal, plastic sectors, all those wastes should be recovered. So circular economy is an important tool. So it is also relevant to climate change and also relevant to the plastic waste. You know, the plastic waste in seas is an important pollution, and the main perspective is the same in all environmental issues. First of all, you should stop producing or you produce less as possible. But if you have to produce, then you should recover it, recycle it. And also the sustainable consumption is also important. The young people should be trained, you know, they should reduce the demand. You know, there is supply and demand, and actually if we do not intervene with supply and demand, then you cannot solve this problem.
Thank you very much. And I think I saw my colleague Jill from the British Council, who was hoping to speak earlier.
Yes, I'm the director for the British Council. I wanted to go back to the point that was made quite early on about inequality or lack of equity for women, and that being a root cause of lack of empowerment and has a knock-on effect with climate. And then to link that with what can we do through education and training or through sanctions and punishment, for example, to you know, rectify that situation in terms of equity of both sexes.
I'll give you the floor first this time.
Starting from the first question, we have been talking about that. Inequality is the most important reason why the women are adversely affected. Inequality should be overcome, and it brings good results in all other factors, sub-factors. So this is basic. So green transformation or climate change struggle, this would be considered as an opportunity to overcome inequalities. You know, women is powerful, so we should use the strengths of women to change it into positive.
Thank you. Louisa?
On this general idea, okay, I would see the key in employment. You know, there are a lot of issues. So there's violence against women is an expression of a power imbalance, I think, at base. And one fights it not by saying, please don't be violent, but by ensuring that women enjoy equal rights. And, you know, also, I think we see statistically that women who earn a living are less frequently victims of violence than those who don't. So there's some kind of dependency going on there that is a problem. So I think, okay, how do we deal with that? You know, looking at specific examples here, I talked about it a little bit, but we need to deal with the care responsibilities to ensure that there's an option, an alternative provision of care, whether it's through state funded kindergartens and preschools or quality care for the elderly and persons with disabilities, so it becomes possible for more women to enter the labor force. Then dealing with stereotypes around the types of jobs that are women's work and not women's work. We see that those are completely artificially created and women can do anything. So creating examples, I think it's one thing we're trying to do is show these success stories that women can be automotive repair people and earn a good living doing that as well. Dealing with the wage gap, because we see there's a huge wage gap between men and women. There's a big agenda. So, but I think, it requires a combination of legislation, good examples, and then proper incentives. I think in the case of Turkey, it would really help to have more women in positions of political power. I'm sure, I attend lots of events, and many of those events involve the family photo, which is often, a big line of men where I get to stand in the middle because I'm the only woman there, or ribbon cutting, you get the picture. So, we have the one woman minister. We have, I think, 4 elected mayors out of 81 from the last elections. So in parliament, there's also a very small share. I have become over time a believer in quotas. I think they are not an expression of inequality, but a rectification of past and historical inequalities. And whatever the political persuasion of the woman who's elected, it helps to have more women as role models, examples, and presenting different experiences. So there's a huge agenda to deal with this inequity, but I think it is an area where it's possible to see progress, and to see progress in less than a lifetime. I think there are examples in places where I've worked where just having a different approach from the political leadership can change the conversation entirely about, for example, employment of women in non-traditional occupations. So I think change is possible, and there are a lot of aspects, and it's a big agenda, but I think it's one that can be quite rewarding if the right alliance of forces of political authority, social pressure, advocacy, and men who are allies in the struggle.
Thank you. Lute, Director from the British Institute.
Thank you very much for this really very interesting panel. I have a very specific question. Children were mentioned several times. And of course, the family is very important for the education of children. But on the other hand, there is always also the school. And I was wondering whether awareness building activities for anything related to climate change, gender equality, plastic waste is embedded in the curriculum at the moment, or whether there are plans to include it.
I think that's for you, Tuğba.
Environmental pollution. There is actually a lecture in secondary and high school. And also these topics are being discussed in science lectures. And in our policy documents, we are working together with the Ministry of Education. We are trying to have a specific lecture for environment. And right now, I can say Ministry of Education has just started to work on it. The plastics, waste, environment pollution, and everything, they are intermingled. So there will be a specific lecture for children. And also there will be some practical aspects of it. And also, as the Environment Ministry, there are museums or different we have different plans also in line with our adaptation plan. We are developing online games because by this way we can reach children or adolescents because they are playing online games, video games, etc. So we would like to include environment messages in those online games, into cartoons and etc. So we are working with Ministry of Tourism and Culture, and also we are working with the Higher Education Board. This topic is a general topic. An engineer or a sociologist or a teacher, for instance, should take into consideration the environment. Digitalization and climate are hand in hand in today's world. So we are also working in close cooperation with the Higher Education Board so that such kind of lectures be on their curricula. So there are a lot to do. Our country is, very wide and very large, so it's not easy to have it in a standard way all through the country. We have millions of students. There are schools everywhere, but we should turn this into our own advantage. The teachers should act like climate envoys. So we are hand in hand with ministries. Huge work is going on, I can say.
Thank you very much. Do I see any other questions in the room? Then finally, oh, yes. Oh, do go ahead.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks to the panelists. I think it's been really interesting. My name's Carl. I'm the head of our UK in Turkey Economy and Prosperity team based in Istanbul. It's fantastic to see so many people here on such an interesting topic. My question is, what's the role of countries like the UK and Turkey as outward-facing, diplomatically influential and big donor countries in promoting the role of women in advancing climate issues and creating an environment where we do utilize 100% of our creativity, ingenuity, and brain power? And how do we do that now rather than in 300 years?
For an answer to that one. We're always open for more funding. Sorry. No, kidding. No, I think that, discussions like this are a really good starting point to show where the convictions lie. And then I think it's translated, as we've seen. We are now implementing a UK funded program of earthquake response and recovery, which we had the pleasure to visit together, where it's very clear that the priorities need to include, green friendly and gender responsive. So I think that's a helpful way to do it. We would like to do more always, but I think in the aid programs, ensuring that these criteria are enforced. But enforced, I would have to say, I would go back to my earlier point about ideological sounding arguments, that everything can be expressed in a way that can be embraced enthusiastically by recipients and by the local community that's being asked to implement. So I think, play a huge role. I think, unfortunately, UK is no longer member of the EU, but the EU also plays a huge role in things like the Green New Deal, where it's advocacy, but then it's also, there's a point at which it becomes very firm, a force of taxation to ensure that policies change domestically. And I think the more that we can see, let's say, the force of taxation, which is what it is down the road ultimately on green issues, that's great. It would be great if there would be a gender equality tax as well. Thanks.
Tuğba.
Teşekkürler. Tabii ki İngiltere aslında
Of course,
dünyada
United Kingdom is an important country who worked hard to the net zero policies, and one of the first countries started the net zero, and UK has her policies and programs in terms of climate, and UK is a pioneer country in climate change. In 2020, as far as I remember, we have made a finance conference, so actually we still in good cooperation with the UK. When we look at the subject from the perspective of women, this transformation requires financial and technological support. You know, we have policies and it's okay to define policies, but when we look at the world, we see the policies, unfortunately, are the starting point only. The practice is more important. And the latest IPCC report also reflected this reality. Within the developed countries, the majority of the countries could not reach their targets. So, of course, in relation to the Paris Agreement, you know, we are providing our statements and we are always more decisive and we are always more enthusiastic about our objectives and targets. But we should also focus on practice more than policies because practice is more difficult. So in terms of practice, we can take into consideration the cooperation of the UK or Germany or other countries. Turkey and the UK are also trade partners. So maybe in the future, the trade volume will continue to increase because when we look at Turkey, we are adaptable to new standards and this is one of our strengths. So this is our potential and we would like to use our potential to transform our country. So when I come to women, again, in all those aspects, we have women. So I cannot say that working specifically for women because in our ministry, we are all women working. So we are working all together, but in terms of adaptation, in terms of vulnerability, of course, they need a positive discrimination, you know, so we should focus on our policies accordingly. And we are working very closely with the UK, and this potential will continue in the future. And the embassy is also supporting us very decisively.
And if I can say a word for the UK, because I know Carl's question was aimed at us as well, I think we now have a real responsibility to actually follow our own policies. We have this women and girls strategy in place, and actually we have a duty to mainstream the perspectives of women and girls and the impact of our policies on women and girls into everything we do. And that means involving them when those policies are being created as well, whether that is domestic, global, or in the development space. So, but I think I'm interested by, we had a little conversation earlier about women taking on more and more positions at the British Embassy to Turkey, and more women in the Environment Ministry. Actually, there is also a note to ourselves to make sure that we have gender balance and that we don't end up being just women talking to ourselves when we talk about climate, because that can be a risk too. So actually, we need to be out there. Thank you to everybody who's here today, both male and female, and to keep having that conversation on climate and developing policies which brings all of our different perspectives together and helps us to think through all the impact of our potential policies, whether those are on ways of mitigating climate change, bringing down our carbon emissions, or the impact of our policies to actually adapt to climate change, to make sure that we're really addressing the right issues and have really understood where the problems lie. And the better we get at that, the better our chances of solving the problem within the next 300 years. I'm super grateful to Tuğba and to Louisa for being with us today and to all of you for a really rich discussion. We now have a reception, which you are welcome to join to continue exchanging thoughts on these critical issues. And we're delighted to be able to offer those of you who are not fasting vegetarian food today from Hatay. So please enjoy it, and we hope to see you all again soon at our next climate event.